To the girl who reads by flashlight, who sees dragons in the clouds, who feels most alive in worlds that never were, who knows magic is real, who dreams. To the people who look at the stars and wish, this is for you. You could rattle the stars, you could do anything if only you dared. Only you can decide what breaks you. To the stars who listen and the dreams that are answered. Grab a snack and let's talk about some books. Hi friend, welcome to my channel. My name is Mia, or the Divine Homie. You may know me from TikTok or Instagram. I post a ton of content about books, spirituality, and just life in general, mental health, all that good stuff. I feel like fall is the perfect time to read fantasy because it's just so cozy and warm. I'm going to be sharing with you guys both young adult and adult fantasy novels that I really love and I like to reread often, or that I'm currently reading, and all that good jazz. Let's talk about some books. So before the Divine Homie was ever a thing, I actually used to run like a little book blog called Wildflower Books on Instagram, where I used to take a ton of book photos and write book reviews and like work with book brands and stuff like that, and I really loved it. So I kind of want to bring books back into my content. I miss talking about them with people. I miss like being able to talk about characters and what I enjoyed and what I didn't like in books with people, because it's been a minute since I've done any book reviews or anything like that, and I love books. I have a whole degree in literature and writing, so I'm really dedicated to books, in case you can't tell. And now I use my 4-year degree by talking about books on the internet. Totally worth it. Totally worth it. We're not even gonna think about it. So worth it. If you don't know me, I'm absolutely obsessed with fantasy. It's probably my favorite genre of anything. Video games, books, TV shows, movies. I love fantasy. I think I just love escaping our reality and dipping into another world and exploring that, because why do I want to read more of our reality all the time? And like, don't get me wrong, I love me some contemporary fiction, some literature, but fantasy has my heart. I'm obsessed. For me, with any book, it's all about the characters. Like, I care about how much I can connect to the characters more than pretty much any other aspect of the book. So please keep that in mind when I'm talking about the books today. Some of the writing may not be the highest quality in a few of these, but I absolutely fell in love with the characters, their story, and I just found them to be super fun, distracting reads. But some of these books on this list I think are extremely well written and were a little bit harder to get through because they were so well written and so expansive. So I have a whole broad array of different types of books, from like super easy, fun, quick reads that are kind of silly to serious, intense fantasy that took me like 3 months to get through. So go ahead, strap in, grab your coffee, get cozy, and let's talk about books. So first up we have Circe. I think that's how it's pronounced. I'm not sure. I'm watching Game of Thrones right now for the second time, so if it's not Circe, I'm just thinking of Game of Thrones, but this is how I said it in my head. If you grew up reading Percy Jackson or you loved Greek mythology, I 10 out of 10 recommend this book for you. I think you will absolutely adore it. This tells the tale of a powerful witch, Circe, who is torn between the mortals she loves and the gods that she was born a part of. Circe is a powerful witch, and you can even see her featured in the Odyssey too. I love how Madeline Miller connects all the elements in her story to elements of Greek mythology in a way that feels really authentic but also reinventive. Circe, our main character, grows extremely powerful, and Zeus becomes threatened by her and banishes her to a deserted island. There she kind of hones her skills and begins to experience new things and comes in contact with a lot of different gods and mythological creatures that you may be familiar with if you've read that Percy Jackson series, or you've ever enjoyed Greek mythology, or you've read the Odyssey. This is one of those books where the quality of the writing is just absolutely amazing. Madeline Miller is a masterful storyteller. She's also the author of The Song of Achilles, which is another absolutely amazing retelling of mythology. This story does start off a lot slower paced, but then it picks up and gets really interesting. Once Circe gets to this deserted island is when I really fell in love with the story and got really hooked with it. I absolutely love Circe's character. I think she's just really powerful and somebody that a lot of people will connect with. If you haven't already read this book, I definitely think you should. So I'm showing you guys the second book of this series, but the first one is what you should start off with, The Name of the Wind. It's the first in the Kingkiller Chronicles, and I absolutely love this series so much. It's tugging on my heartstrings. I love it so much. It's written by Patrick Rothfuss. I do not know if I'm saying his name right because it's kind of a mouthful, so let's just call him Patrick. I'm really sad that I don't still have a copy of the first book because I really want to do a reread soon, so maybe for Christmas I will ask for a copy of that. So The Name of the Wind is an adult fantasy novel that centers on our main character Kvothe as he grows into one of the most notorious wizards in their world. The first novel in the series follows Kvothe through his childhood, then his time at a magic boarding school, which kind of gives off some like Harry Potter vibes. I love it. And then it follows him and then it finally follows Kvothe as he becomes a king killer and later on a fugitive. This is another one of the books where the writing is top tier, top quality. It was harder for me to get through the first book in the series and this one too. They are a little bit more dense, a little bit more heavy of a read, but the world building is so intense. The characters are so well written, and Rothfuss really takes his time to develop the story in a way that draws you in and makes you feel more like you're reading a non-fiction book as opposed to a book of fiction or fantasy, because it's just so real and I just adore the characters so much. It's kind of like an adult magical world and it's everything you could want. If you enjoyed Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings, I highly recommend this series because it's kind of similar and it's really well written like those two. Next up we have Outlander by Diana Gabaladon. I cannot pronounce her last name properly either, so please excuse me with that. Outlander is an adult historical fantasy slash fiction series that follows Claire Randall, who was a former combat nurse, as she's sent back in time from 1945 to 1743. In 1743, Claire finds herself trapped in the middle of a war in Scotland. There she meets Jamie and becomes torn between her husband back in 1945 and Jamie in 1743. She falls in love with her new life as an outsider or Sassenach in the Scottish Highlands, and I just think this story is so lovely, and I'm convinced that I've had a past life in the Scottish Highlands or something because I just feel so connected to Scotland and the characters in the story and the history. I love it. It feels so magical but also really realistic, and this is another one of those books that has really high quality writing and does take a little bit longer to get through, but I think it's worth it. If you cannot get through something so dense, then I definitely recommend watching the TV show, which is steamy and entertaining as frick. And I'm sorry, but Jamie makes me question my sexuality. Next up we have Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson, and this is a book that I'm currently reading, but I can already tell that I'm gonna fall in love with it because it's just everything that I want in a fantasy novel, honestly. Sanderson is such a masterful storyteller, and I think he's one of the masters of fantasy writing. I have found that all of Sanderson's books start off a bit slow, and Mistborn is no exception with that. It does take a minute to get into, but once I got into it, I've been really enjoying it, and I hope that I have time to finish this book soon. Mistborn has such an interesting and different magic system that I haven't seen duplicated or really replicated anywhere else, and I really like that because it's hard to find something new in fantasy because it's so oversaturated nowadays. I would say that Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo has a similar vibe to this book because they're both about like a group of criminals going on a massive heist. Next up we have Nevernight by Kristoff. So if you're like me and you like kind of bad, sexy, murderous assassins, I 10 out of 10 recommend Nevernight. It is a bit raunchy, steamy, gory, gruesome, hard to get through if you're not into that sort of stuff, but if you are into murder and stuff, I 10 out of 10 recommend Nevernight. I feel like it's really refreshing to see someone go so hardcore with it being so gory because I think it shows off how brutal reality is. That's kind of nice and different because a lot of times I feel like fantasy will water that down, but I feel like this doesn't water it down so much as other novels do. The assassins seem like assassins in this one, and I like that. Nevernight, we follow our main character Mia Corveri as she works to become a blade at the temple of the Lady of Our Blessed Murder. Surviving initiation is a feat all of its own because there's an unknown killer on the loose killing the other acolytes or initiate. I like to think that if Selena Sardathian, Rhysand, Rowan, Lucien, and Lorcan all came together with Mia Corveri, they would shatter the world. And I would also want to be in the middle of that. This is Shadow and Bone. I think Shadow and Bone is just an essential YA fantasy to read. It's one of the go-to books that everyone on BookTube or BookTok talks about. They also recently put this out as a TV show on Netflix, which I haven't watched the show yet. I think I watched like an episode and I didn't really enjoy it. This isn't my most favorite book of Leigh Bardugo. I will get to my favorite book of her next. I think this is a book that you do need to read so that you can understand the world for the rest of her books. Shadow and Bone follows Alina Starkov, a soldier, as she is trying to make it across the Shadow Fold, which is this dangerous place, and it's caused this massive tear in their country. There's a ton of war going on, and she is actually discovered to have magic and then taken away to this magic school where she learns to wield her powers as the Sun Summoner, and she has to go up against the Darkling, and there's just this whole turmoil and fight that goes on, and it's really great. It just has the classics of everything people look for in a fantasy novel, so I recommend that if you're just like getting started or you're interested in reading the rest of the Grishaverse. My favorite Leigh Bardugo book is actually King of Scars. I think this is the most recent duology that she's worked on. I haven't read the second book in the duology, but this one stole my heart more so than the Six of Crows series or the Shadow and Bone series. I really enjoyed following along with these characters, specifically Nina. She really just has my heart, and I loved hearing more of Zoya's story and getting in her head because I feel like the other series didn't really do her justice, and we get to hear from her this time, and it's really lovely. I think you should definitely read through all the books just so that you can read this duology because I really loved it. I do think that Nikolai's point of view is the least interesting in this book, but I am usually always interested in the more magical side of things, so that does make sense for me. But all in all, I think the Grishaverse is a really lovely universe for you to explore if you're dipping your toes into fantasy or you just want to have some like new fantasy reads this fall. Ask me to spin the finest yarn or thread, and I can do it faster than any man, even with my eyes closed. Yet ask me to tell a lie, and I will stumble and falter to even think of one. Spin the Dawn was a new fantasy that I didn't expect to blow me away. I feel like it's really hard for young adult fantasy to do something new or to excite me, but this one really succeeded when it first came out. So Spin the Dawn is a magical adventure that you would not expect to fall in love with. Please pick it up. I think the second one has already come out too. So pick it up and binge read. So this story combines a Mulan-inspired fairy tale with really rich world building and really interesting and lively characters. The Dawn tells the story of Maya, a young tailor, as she goes to compete in the competition to become the imperial tailor in order to restore her family's honor. In their society, she has to disguise herself as a boy in order to be able to compete, and this presents a lot of challenges. I think the most unbelievable part of this book is Maya pretending to be a boy. Honestly, that's the worst part because it's not believable for a second, but we'll put a pin in that. This story has some really interesting twists and turns once the magic comes in and once the adventure picks up and Maya is taken away on this magical, unexpected adventure. 10 out of 10, recommend that you check this book out. I'm guessing the sky is full of stars. It is, but the only ones that matter are the ones you see. Storm and Fury, written by Jennifer L. Armentrout, is another one of those books that's just like really angsty. It's everything you would expect a YA fantasy novel to be. The writing's not the best, but for some reason you find yourself like wanting to devour the whole book. I definitely devoured this one. Storm and Fury is the first of the Dark Elements spin-off series, and I didn't read that series, but I picked up Storm and Fury anyway without any confusion. Storm and Fury follows Trinity Martin, an 18-year-old who's struggling with a disease that's causing her to slowly lose her eyesight. And she's also able to communicate with spirits, which is a whole nother issue in itself. On top of that, her whole existence is a dangerous secret that she has to keep. Trinity is hidden away at a complex guarded by wardens who are gargoyles, which is so interesting. I don't often see gargoyles represented in fantasy. But the complicated thing is, if her secret's discovered, demons will literally devour her, and the gargoyles have to try to guard her, but the demons are coming, is what happens in this book. It's really just fun to follow along with the story. I don't think much happens in this book, but I still was just like obsessed with reading the whole thing because the characters were hot and fun. This is that angsty good shit, you know? 10 out of 10. So next we have another Brandon Sanderson novel, because how could we not have multiple Sanderson novels on an ultimate fantasy recommendations list? And I know that this book is technically sci-fi, but we're gonna just call it fantasy because I feel like it feels like a fantasy. I feel like it feels like a fantasy. I actually gave this book 5 out of 5 stars on Goodreads, which is really rare for me, so that's how you know it's a really good book. In fact, this is the first Sanderson book that I ever read, and I was really impressed by it, and it caused me to go pick up Mistborn, which I'm now currently reading. So this story follows Spensa Nightshade as she works to become a pilot for this defense force. The whole thing is though that her society is stuck underground because they're dealing with these alien forms that are coming to attack them. And so Spensa works to kind of take her society beyond that. She does become a part of this defense force. And the story kind of follows along her journey of trying to find her place there and also trying to fight this war. And it's so wonderful. I'm not going to tell you any more about it because you just need to go read it. I got a lollipop. I also forgot I have coffee. Aurora Rising, written by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff, is another 5 out of 5 fantasy/sci-fi novel for me. I read this around the same time that I read Skyward, and I love them both, and I feel like the covers are actually such a similar vibe. Aurora Rising is another book that I gave 5 out of 5 stars on Goodreads, and it's not necessarily because the writing is so high quality, but it's because the characters and the story was just so fun. Like, this group of characters feels like they're your best friends and you never want to leave, and that you're going to live out the rest of your days with them as your homies, you know? If you have the chance, I actually really recommend listening to this book on audio because it has a full cast audio and it just made it so much more immersive and fun and interesting. And I'm also not telling you guys any more about this book either because you need to just go ahead and pick it up and read it. Go get 'em, squad. 312, 312. Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Laini Taylor is one of the books that really started my love of fantasy. It's one of the books I read like in middle school or at the very beginning of high school, and it really sparked my absolute obsession and hunger for reading as many fantasy books as I could possibly get my hands on. Now, I haven't read Daughter of Smoke and Bone in a long time, but I'm planning on doing a reread soon as I finish rereading all of Sarah J. Maas's books. This series is up next. I think Laini Taylor's poetic and lyrical writing really brings a different voice to fantasy and her stories that makes them feel so magical while also just being so well written and immersive. And I just absolutely fell in love with Prague and the Chimera and the Seraphim. This story is about forbidden love. It's a modern fantasy, and I don't often love modern fantasies, but this one really drew me in. And I really love the forbidden love in this book. I just really loved it. I love this book. I love this series. It has such a special place in my heart. Now, I feel like I should talk about all of these books at once because I love them, and I love them so much that like I would sell my soul. Sarah J. Maas just has a hold on my heart that no other author does, and it's simply because of the characters and how much they pull on my heartstrings. I feel like her characters truly are my best friends. And please don't ask me to pick between her series. I love them all. I do think Crescent City is my least favorite so far. I feel like every time in the first book of the series, Sarah J. Maas spends so long setting everything up that the first book of her series are never the best. They always get better from there though. And every time I've read Crescent City, 100 pages have fallen out of my book, and it's just caused some reading issues for me. But let's go ahead and talk about A Court of Thorns and Roses and Throne of Glass. So if you haven't already read these fantasy books, I'm not quite sure why. Like, please read them. They're absolutely amazing. They're they're very similar to Jennifer L. Armentrout in the way that they're not the best quality. They are very angsty, a little sexy, spicy. If you really just like really badass female characters and magic and the fae and just like everything, read these. These are the last ones that I'm talking about because I just love them so much. Like, Sarah J. Maas is magic and these characters could murder me. They all make me question my sexuality. I think I'm just fae-sexual. I really love the Throne of Glass series. I love the twists that come into this series. I love our protagonist, Selena. I'm gonna call her by her name that's known in the first book so that I don't give off any spoilers because that's not nice. My favorite thing about Sarah J. Maas novels is hearing how her characters are all recovering from some sort of really intense trauma. As someone that's currently on a healing journey and has survived a lot of trauma, it's something I find really relatable and really refreshing. I do think it's not always the most accurate, but I think it's a really great effort and it allows me to connect. It makes me just really emotional when I read these books. When I read these books, the whole time I'm reading them, I'm usually like in tears just because I love them so much and it's so overwhelming. Can we please look at how nice these covers are? Love them. I think if you're going to read the Sarah J Maas books, I recommend starting off with the Throne of Glass series and reading through the Tower of Dawn before switching over to A Court of Thorns and Roses, and then reading like the first 3 books in this series, and then read Kingdom of Ash because there's a tie-in, and I think if you've read A Court of Thorns and Roses before Kingdom of Ash, it just makes it like hit that much harder. I need Sarah to just release more books constantly. I'm really upset. I don't think the Throne of Glass series ended well. I think it needed one more book. I need one more book. I need more books, Sarah. Give me more books. Psst, psst. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, please, because that's good for the algorithm, and then I also like to see that you guys liked my video. Thank you guys so much for watching today's video. I hope that you guys found some new books that you want to read, or you just enjoyed talking about books with me. Let me know down in the comments below if you've read any books on this list, what you thought about them, or if you don't see it on your list, what's your favorite fantasy novel? Adult, young adult, new adult, anything like that. I'm just so interested to hear your thoughts, and I appreciate you so much for sitting with me and watching this video. I love hanging out with you guys. Before you leave, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I will see you next week. Bye.